And Mel Hurting is not trying to mislead anyone. Mel Hurting is speaking the truth, and it is here in exhaustive, depressing detail, and I urge every single one of you to read it, and I urge you to join me in welcoming a hero of mine, Mel Hurting, here tonight.
I guarantee you that the truth about Canada will shock you and amaze you and certainly change your perspective about what has been happening to our country in recent years in a steady, ongoing, deepening, depressing, and serious deterioration. What set me to work on the truth about Canada for the first time is my increasing disappointment and then my increasing anger about how Canadians were so often being misled and often deceived. Time after time, for example, I would read something online. First thing in the morning, I go to StatsCan and read what is called a daily, which, as the name implied, comes out every day, Monday to Friday. And then time after time, when the story then subsequently appeared in the press, I would be dumbfounded at how the information was distorted and manipulated by the time that it reached the press or the television screens across the country. The worst offenders were journalists who never bothered to question the biased nonsense that regularly came from the likes of the Fraser Institute and the C.D. Howe Institute, the Conference Board of Canada, or the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, whenever these conservative, continentalist, comprador organizations released what was invariably repeated in the media, word for word, as gospel, if not on the front page, then for sure prominently in the first section or on the front page of the business section. What Tom DeQuino, or Jack Mintz, or the Chamber of Commerce says is always treated as reliable front page news or dependable and thoughtful research and commentary. Not only is the public often fed distorted and untrue information, but very often vitally important information from other sources, from the OECD, for example, is either totally ignored or buried deep in the back pages of the newspapers and periodicals. And since poll after poll after poll shows that the great overwhelming majority of Canadians have different priorities and different perspectives than the CEOs of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives and the wealthy guys in this country, how is it that the big CEOs get their way every time in a liberal government or in a conservative government? The overwhelming majority of Canadians may want a different form of taxation. The CEOs want something else and they get their way. Ultimately, my book is about social justice. It's about the quality of life and about democracy. The following quote is from UNICEF's 2007 Innocenti report, and here's what they said. The true measure of a nation's standing is how well it attends to its children, their health and their safety, their material security, their education and their socialization, and their sense of being loved, valued, and included in the families and societies into which they are born. And then when you hear some of the following, you'll see how we have failed in so many of the things I've just described. Okay, from the preface of the book, this book is about how Canada has changed, and changed very much for the worse, under the governments of Brian Mulroney, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper. Can you imagine the top 6% own 97% of the wealth in this country? Where do we stand in Canada? You know, this great, egalitarian, wonderful country that we've developed. We're 40th in terms of the distribution of income. Canada's public expenditure on education as a percentage of all government spending we are now 91st. 91st. A further theme is the unparalleled sellout of our country in a manner that no other developed country would ever dream of allowing. While this has been taking place at a greatly accelerated rate, the purposeful dissemination in the print media of false information downplaying the rapidly growing foreign ownership and control of Canada goes a long way to explaining our myopic politicians and why they have failed to take action on this and other related problems, as we quickly are robbing ourselves of our ability to plan and manage our own future. There is no other country in the world that would allow the degree of foreign ownership and control that we have in this country. There's no other country in the world that would allow the petroleum industry to be majority foreign owned, the rubber industry, the chemical industry, and the computer industry, etc., etc. People have said, well, isn't there a lot of foreign investment and Canadian investment in the United States? You should measure it on the basis of GDP. In the United States, the amount of, the number of workers working for foreign-controlled companies is roughly about 4%. In Canada, it's closer to 35%, and it's growing substantially every single year. So my chapter on the Free Trade Agreement is subtitled, The Greatest Con Job in Canadian History. When you read it, I hope you will ask yourselves, why have you never read any of this information before in our newspapers or our magazines? Why have you never seen anything remotely like this on television? God knows you've been inundated regularly with an abundance of continentalist propaganda to the contrary. When you read the economic chapters in this book on foreign ownership, on trade, on investment, on productivity, on competitiveness and taxation, I hope you will be aware of the fact that exactly the same people who have intentionally left us in these weakened positions have for some time now been having secret meetings, and I'll talk about it in the conclusion, planning for more of the same, planning for more integration of Canada with the United States, planning to surrender more ownership and control of our businesses, planning to guarantee Americans more access to our natural resources, and they're having high-level meetings to integrate Canada with the United States right now. Big business in the form of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, the very same people who put us in this lousy position with two so-called trade agreements, which, by the way, weren't really about trade, as you will see in those chapter on the FTA and on NAFTA. I mean, I have to tell you something. It boggles my mind that any Canadians who care about our country could have ever signed the NAFTA agreement. And to show you how we've become a colonial institution, the panic in Ottawa and in the media about, oh my God, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton want to cancel the NAFTA. It would be the best possible thing that could ever happen to Canada. Under Mulroney and under Chrétien and under Martin and under this guy Harper, the graph of our spending on social programs has gone downhill at a 45-degree angle. Well, if that's the case, if we've got such high poverty, and if we don't spend very much on social programs, then obviously we've got to have a pretty good system of welfare so that people don't suffer too much. Are you kidding? We're 22nd in the world, in the developed nations, in terms of the amount of money that we spend on welfare. People on welfare in Canada today are receiving less than they did on any comparative basis in real terms than they received back in 1980. The huge increases in the number of people in poverty, but GDP in this country, since we made that resolution in the House of Commons back in 1989, GDP has increased by over $900 billion and more than doubled. So you have to say to yourself, well, what happened to the money? Where did the money go? I mean, if we're not spending it on social programs, if we're not spending on research and development, if we're not spending on welfare, where did it go? Well, a huge amount of it went out of the country to tax havens. It went out of the country. A lot of these companies borrow money from Canadian banks, and then they take the money and the interest charges and they deduct it from their profits, and then they send their money to tax havens. Brian Mulroney abolished the Foreign Investment Review Agency and established the Investment Canada, and since then $847 billion worth of investment has been measured by Investment Canada. 97.6% of that $847 billion was for takeovers of Canadian companies, and a puny 2.4% was for new business investment. In June of 2006, the North American Competitive Council, consisting of business leaders from each of the NAFTA countries, was formed to, quote, advise governments, end of quote. All of the members of this organization are, in fact, members of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, the lobby group which serves as a Canadian secretariat. Now, these meetings are designed, what for? To further integrate Canada into the United States, to have us adopt more American standards of values, to give the Americans even more guaranteed access to our resources and unimpeded ability to buy up the ownership and the control of even more of our country. All this covert under-the-table planning is happening in Canada, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of Canadians, year after year, in poll after poll, show that they don't want to integrate further with the United States, show that they believe Canada has been too good a country for us to surrender to our greedy and selfish big business leaders whose values are so very different from those of most Canadians and who are still very proud of our country, our culture, and our history, our values, our civility, our tolerance, and they are not the slightest bit interested in further harmonization and integration with the United States. Alas, the compradors, the neocons, and the continentalists are powerful, they're well organized, they're well financed, and we now know that the initial SPP agenda included some 300 items. In the words of a spokesman for the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, quote, many of these represent very small steps, but on the other hand, even 300 small steps, if we take them all, add to a pretty giant leap for North America. In 2007, a small group of Canadians, including authors, academics, musicians, and former politicians, joined forces to further oppose integration with the United States, and they issued a statement. Excuse me. Canada faces a stark choice. We can be gradually assimilated and lose our identity as a nation, or we can retain our independence and renew our own unique vision of what we wish for Canada's future. A vision of strong communities, tolerance, equality, environmental stewardship, and a peaceful and a constructive role in the world. We believe that in spite of recent developments, Canadians believe passionately in the traditional values that guided this country into its post-war nation building. The Security and Prosperity Partnership will give us neither security nor prosperity, nor is it a genuine partnership. We stand against this scheme and urge other Canadians to join us. If we want to regain the control of our country, we've got to start getting more directly involved in politics. I love the Suzuki Foundation, I love the Sierra Club, I love the Council of Canadians, etc. But if you want to help regain control of your country, you've got to become directly involved in politics. If you don't do that, you're leaving it up to them to grab control of the agenda for the future of our country. Thank you.